Showtime 112 is an ambassador of Trustmaster. After the fall of communism and arrival of democracy, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia began to break apart. One by one, federal republics declared independence. Bosnia and Herzegovina was the third republic to do so. Once again, Serbs refused to accept it, and with the support of Serb-dominated federal army, they declared themselves separate from Bosnia, calling their entity Republika Srpska. This could literally be translated as Serbian Republic. Of the three ethnic groups involved in the Bosnian War, Serbs were the only ones with fixed-wing aviation, which was left to them by the federal army. The types operated by them were J-21 Jastreb, meaning hawk, and J-22 Orao, meaning eagle. Trustmaster was kind enough to send me the Viper TQS mission pack free of charge in exchange for an honest review. I've been using it for about 10 days, and the video you are currently watching was produced using this particular product. TQS is short for Throttle Quadrant System, and it's a very accurate replica of the real-life system on the F-16. It even has the official US Air Force license. The system is quite heavy, and it has a very solid and sturdy feel. This especially goes for the grip itself. Although I've never flown the real thing, it feels very realistic. There you can find switches for your speed brakes, dogfight radar modes, and radio and IFF controller. There are also axis controllers for the radar cursor, antenna elevation, and manual range. Two additional buttons not found on the real Viper are also included. The throttle movement feels very smooth and precise. You can adjust the friction with a key placed in the back, but I felt the default setting to be satisfactory. Pushing the throttle all the way forward, you will reach the afterburner detent. In order to engage the afterburner, you need to lift the grip and push it further. The real F-16 grip works the same way, and you always know where your maximum millpower is. On the opposite side, you need to pull the pinky lever to move your throttle from idle to engine cutoff. The panel features a number of switches and knobs which feel very strong and durable. The only exception to this is the landing gear lever, which doesn't match the quality and feel of everything else. You need to use some strength to operate these switches, which gives them a realistic feel. They look very much like the real ones, even though their locations might be different. One thing you don't find in the real Viper is this axis controller. By default, it's set to control the zoom, although it's not very practical to reach without moving your hand from the grip, especially in the low power setting. But you can bind the added switch behind the speed brakes to slow zoom, and it works okay. Viper TQS mission pack comes pre-assembled. All you have to do is connect it to your PC with a cable. It's essentially plug and play. DCS will recognize it, and the F-16 module will have all the controls set up just right. One thing you need to do is enable virtual buttons in the Windows controller setup to make every switch work properly. Should you buy this product? If you're a serious sim player who can afford high-end controllers, and if your favorite plane happens to be F-16, or even JF-17 which has a similar grip, I'm sure you'll be very happy with the Viper TQS. Of course, you can use it for any other module as well. The fact that it's a realistic replica gives it that special edge over generic controllers in my opinion. Both of these were indigenous types, designed and produced in Yugoslavia. More modern J-22 was a result of cooperation with Romania in 1970s. J-21 Jastreb was a much older design which first took off in 1961. It was conceived for the roles of training, reconnaissance, and light attack, and it was replacing F-84 Thunderjet, the first jet operated by Yugoslavia. For this reenactment, F-84 is the airplane we use as a stand-in, since J-21 Jastreb is not available in any flight sim, and it's unlikely it ever will be. J-21 was powered by license-built Rolls-Royce Viper engine, and its top speed was 820 km per hour, or 442 knots. It was armed with 3 machine guns and it could carry about 800 kilograms of payload. By 1990s, it was badly outdated. But in a situation where your opponents have no military aviation and only have limited anti-aircraft defenses, it was nevertheless useful. In April 1993, about a year after the war in Bosnia broke out, NATO began enforcing a no-fly zone over the country under the codename Deny Flight. This didn't completely prevent the use of military aviation, however, and NATO forces would issue warnings, after which the violating aircraft would return to their bases or land immediately in case of helicopters. In order to circumvent the no-fly zone, Bosnian Serbs moved some of their aviation assets to Udbina airfield in Croatia, also under Serbian control at the time. There, the pilots could maintain their proficiency and still engage in combat sorties in Bosnia when needed. As already mentioned, NATO initially only warned the pilots violating the no-fly zone without taking action against them. This eventually changed on 28 February 1994. The military leadership of Republika Srpska, the Serbian entity in Bosnia, decided to launch an airstrike involving 8 of their aircraft against a very important target. Before the war, many weapons factories were located in the territory of Bosnia, including ones producing a powerful multiple rocket launcher system called Orkan and its ammunition. This 262mm artillery weapon had the range of up to 50 kilometers, and it was developed in cooperation with Iraq. It was produced by a factory in Novi Travnik, which was under control of Bosniaks. At that time, they were often simply called Muslims. Several incomplete Orkan launchers were left behind during the retreat of the Federal Yugoslav Army. Bosniaks also controlled the ammunition factory in Bugojno, and Serbs received intelligence that Bosniaks were initiating the production of rockets for the Orkan system. This powerful weapon could disrupt the balance of forces against the Serbs, and an airstrike was seen as a solution, despite the risk of a possible NATO interception. 8 airplanes were assigned to the task, 6 of them J-21 Jastrebs and 2 J-22 Oraos. There was a dispute between the flight leaders and brigade leadership about the flight profile. Eventually, the flight leaders' view that a low-high-low profile should be used prevailed. Strike aircraft would approach their targets on low altitude, then pop up, attack their targets, and finally return to base on low level. Serb forces in Bosnia were closely monitoring the airspace and NATO communications. The mission was supposed to be cancelled if any NATO fighters were detected patrolling the region. On the morning of 28 February, the local commander in Udbina was supposed to call the higher command in Banja Luka to confirm the mission go-ahead. But it seems like some kind of a misunderstanding occurred, and he couldn't reach any officer familiar with the operation. He decided to launch the mission on his own initiative. Six Jastrebs were divided in 3 pairs. The first one was flown by Captain First Class Ranko Vukmirović and Major Uroš Studen. The second one by Captains First Class Zlatan Crnalić and Goran Zarić. And the third pair by Captains First Class Zlatko Mikerević and Zvezdan Pešić. Their target was the weapons factory in Novi Travnik, while the 2 J-22s were going against the ammunition factory in Bugojno. At one point, the airplanes climbed to medium level. This was probably due to their arranged attack profile, although some sources suggest it might have been due to poor visibility en route. At that moment, the formation was detected by a NATO AWACS patrolling over Hungary. A pair of F-16s from the 526th Fighter Squadron, which was patrolling Bosnian airspace, was alerted, and they soon appeared over the Serbian formation. The 2 Vipers operating from Aviano, Italy were flown by Captains Robert Wilbur Wright and the infamous Scott O'Grady. Their call signs were Black 03 and Black 04. One of the J-22 Orao pilots spotted the F-16s and reported it to the Jastreb's flight leader. He replied that they were proceeding with the attacks nevertheless. The AWACS issued radio warnings to the Serbian flight, ordering them to leave Bosnian airspace. According to some Serbian sources, the warning was never given. However, a Serbian author, Bojan Dimitrijević, writes that the warning was issued on a frequency which Jastrebs couldn't receive. The two American pilots didn't act before the Serbian flight performed their attacks against the two factories, as they were waiting for a clearance. One of the Serbian pilots, Crnalić, actually claims that the F-16s flew through their formation. The clearance finally arrived as the Serbian flight was flying back to Udbina Air Base at about 5,000 feet. At 6:42, Captain Wright locked up one of the Jastrebs and launched an AMRAAM missile. It hit the rearmost jet, which crashed. The pilot was killed. Until that moment, the Serbian flight was unaware that they were being attacked, as their aircraft were not equipped with radar warning receivers. Five minutes later, Captain Wright approached within the range of his AIM-9M missiles. He launched one missile which also hit a Jastreb. The aircraft crashed near the village of Crkveno. By then, the surviving Jastrebs scattered and were trying to evade the attack on very low level. Wright nevertheless caught one of them and launched his second Sidewinder. The missile also hit its target and the Jastreb exploded. Wright's wingman, Scott O'Grady, was then told to engage the Jastrebs as well. He acquired one of them and launched a Sidewinder. Depending on the source, the missile either missed completely due to target maneuvering, it activated its proximity fuse and damaged the Jastreb, or the missile failed to lock the target in the first place. Wright and O'Grady were now bingo fuel, and they headed out to the Adriatic, where an airborne tanker was orbiting. AWACS controller directed another F-16 flight against the surviving Jastrebs. Captain Steve Yogi Allen was the flight leader, and his call sign was Knight 25. Allen was able to catch up with the two surviving Jastrebs at 6:50. He claimed both of them shot down, although he was officially credited with a single kill only.
Altitude. Drop. Altitude. Altitude.
Serbian pilot Zlatan Crnalić was the only one who managed to return back to base, even though his aircraft was damaged. As he was limping back to base, he spotted one of the American aircraft approaching him, and he climbed to a higher altitude as his ejection seat had a minimum altitude requirement. He expected a gun attack, but the F-16 just passed by. The exact reason isn't clear, but it could have been low on fuel, or the pilot realized that Crnalić was about to leave Bosnian airspace, so he let him go. It's unclear which of the F-16 pilots it was. Crnalić performed a dead stick landing as his engine quit on approach, but his Jastreb survived and was eventually repaired. 3 Jastreb pilots were killed: Pešić, Vukmirović and Zarić. 2 others, Student and Mikerević, successfully ejected. This indicates that 5 Jastrebs were lost, and Serbs clearly admit it. American pilots were only credited with 4 kills. Where does the discrepancy come from? One source says that one of the pilots ejected from an undamaged airplane. Another explanation is that Steve Allen could have really hit and shot down 2 airplanes. However, if Allen was the one who hit Crnalić, the pilot who eventually reached his home base, then it's even possible that Scott O'Grady achieved a kill with his Sidewinder, even though his victim might have crashed later. Unfortunately, in his book called Basher 5-2, he doesn't talk about this combat at all. Serbs initially denied their involvement in this incident, and NATO wasn't certain of the identity of the aircraft their pilots shot down either. The local Serb commander who ordered the attack without clearance from higher commanders was reprimanded, but all of the involved pilots were decorated 3 months later. This incident is often known as the Banja Luka incident, as it took place in the relative proximity of this town, and it was the first real combat for NATO in its entire history. Operation Deny Flight would later evolve into much more complex Operation Deliberate Force, but we will leave that for other videos. Join our Patreon supporters or donate on PayPal to keep the channel in business. Thank you and keep watching Showtime 112.